Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of my Vampire Hunter diorama journey, and in this part we're going to start painting, finally, some painting, and it's going to be on the vampire itself, which is kind of, I guess, the main character in the center of the piece. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you for all the positive comments on the first video. It was actually really nice having that break for the Christmas holidays and spending all that time building the diorama. And I was like, I think this is cool, but at the same time, is it just some twigs stuck on a base? I was really proud of it, but you always have those doubts in your mind. And I think it was probably had the best positive feedback from a Patreon post, so that really helped with my head going into this piece and wanting to really put loads of effort in. So thank you for that positivity. We're going to need that riding through because this is going to be tough to hit the deadline, but I hope to bring you some really cool videos along the way. And if I'm stressed, I'll let you know, but I'll still get you some nice tutorials no matter what. I'm going to start breaking up these videos into a little bit more of bite-sized pieces. So instead of how to paint this vampire, the whole thing, I'm going to try and do more videos breaking down the parts, and I think they're really nice separate things. So we're going to have non-metallic metal for part 2, and this first part is going to be painting vampire skin, and I think there's enough there that it deserves its own video. So as the videos come along and you see there's sort of more smaller parts, I'll be interested to see what you think. But anyway, this part 1, is all about painting vampire skin, and it's not just going to be about the skin on this model. I really want to talk about the color palette for the entire piece. This is almost going to lay the foundation and set the tone for everything to come. I knew I wanted to get a lot of atmosphere in this piece, and I wanted it to be cold, dark, snowy, and moody. And the colours that come to mind were obviously blues and greys, and I really wanted some strong red coming out from the blood, and I wanted that to be, really striking. So I wanted most of the palette to be very cold with blues and greys, and then just having little bits of red that would really sort of jump out and be alive in this palette. My intention is to paint everything in a cold, desaturated palette apart from the good guys, and he has the lantern or stick of fire, whatever you call it, the name escapes me right now. Anyway, he's got some fire in his hand, and basically I think the whole thing should be really cold, like all blue and things like that, and then the good guys should be the only thing on the piece that is actually warm and light. And I want that so they stand out apart from each other and it looks good, but also to visually represent the good and the evil side. And the dead body, I'll probably have something in between because she's dying, so I will have some cold elements, but with maybe a warmer skin tone than the vampire for sure. And then also I'll just have that red being really striking. So yeah, everything is going to be blue, purple, cold, horrible colours, and then we'll have those good guys with nice warm tones coming from that flame, and they will literally be, a shining light, hopefully. I mean, it's a bit too late, they're not going to save this poor young lady, but, my intention's there. Last time we looked at some references I'd found for the scene, and I loved that brilliant lilac colour in this piece in the snow, and obviously the other pieces with the blue and things like that. But now I want to show you some of the influence I had for painting the bad guys. So I found this amazing picture of this wolf. What I like about this is the shadows are desaturated purple. So they're definitely purple, but it's not like a vibrant colour. It looks kind of like Scale 75 black leather, that kind of really dullish grey purple. Midtones are obviously a mix with some grey in, and the highlights are a blue grey. So basically we've got blue highlights, purple shadows, both of them are desaturated. And that really got my brain ticking. Should this be the theme for all of the bad guys, the vampire as well? I'm thinking purple shadows, blue highlights, It's a palette I love. I love those two colours, but it also is perfect for them. I'm not just painting it because I like those colours. It really suits the vampires. And you know, with the wolves, I don't want to paint them a plain grey. So I think if I kept that entire atmosphere across everything, so purple shadows for everything and blue light, possibly even the trees themselves, then hopefully I can sell that effect. But I love this reference, and I really like the orange eyes as well. I think I'm going to go for orange eyes instead of red to separate them from the blood. But anyway, this was my first reference, which kind of made me go, yeah, this is going to be my theme for the entire thing. Purple shadow, blue highlight. Then I started to look for references for the vampire. I wanted to paint the vampire first because, well, I'd finished sort of the area he was going to stand in for the base. So he was kind of the first model I could separate from the piece and work on and know that he had a spot and it would fit in the end, hopefully. But also I think the hardest bit of painting wise is going to be the vampire skin, getting that right, and the OSL from the flame. Those are the two things I'm not worried about, but I'm aware they're going to be the most difficult and I need to make them really work. The vampire really is, you know, the center of the piece. He's, yeah, definitely the most important part. So I need that skin to be really, really nice. So I came across this image and instantly I loved it. Similarly to why I loved the wolf, basically. I kind of had a really desaturated greyish purple shadow, and then we have some blue light you can see on the forehead. I took it into Photoshop to check the exact colours, because sometimes your perception of colour can actually be different to, you know, what it pulls out. And I could tell it was like a greyish colour, but when I looked on Photoshop, the shadows were, yeah, really a brownish grey. There was a lot of brown in there, and that makes a lot of sense to me because when we paint a normal skin tone, so not a vampire, then these are basically different types of grey with brown in. That's quite a nice rule when you're painting any skin. And this just had more grey in it to give it less life. You know, we want this to be a dead creature, so we can have similar skin tones, but we want more grey in it to take away from the life. The midtones still had some of that lilac in that I liked, and the highlights were definitely blue. So this kind of, yeah, got my brain ticking again, and I was thinking brown grey shadows into a lilac-ish kind of midtone, and then a blue highlight. So after I picked out the colours in Photoshop, I had a pretty good idea of some paints that would make these colours, and I went to my palette to try and mix them up. The most important colour would be this brown grey from Scale 75. And this was just perfect. Everything we just talked about. It's a grey with a lot of brown in. But I know it's a very beautiful, soft colour. And I'm going to match that with this GW Lilac. And these would form sort of the midtones. And then the highlights were going to be this snow blue. And this snow blue is something we're going to use a lot throughout the whole piece. I thought this is going to be the uniform highlight for everything. It's fairly pale, so it would be a nice highlight, and it's a desaturated blue. It's not too strong. It's a little bit light, so I have to be careful. And then I also used this olive brown for the shadow. Later on, I actually replaced the olive brown with a darker colour, Scale 75, Burnt Umber, because I just wasn't getting the contrast from the olive brown. So you might see me painting with olive brown, but I changed it up later. So I would recommend this Burnt Umber, and I'll put those when we do the mixes. So here we are on the palette, and I just want to show you how I'm going to mix these colours. So I start with that brown grey, which is probably the most important colour, and I'm just going to add a little bit of this lilac until I get the right colour I need. I don't want too much lilac in there, so it's a powerful purple. So just always leaving a little bit of the brown grey in will help to rein this back. So you can see I'm just adding a little more, being brave, but when it gets to a point where it's too purple, then I'll stop. You can see that's pretty much what I'm looking for. You can see the purple, but it's reined back by a little bit of brown. Now I'm going to start adding the blue to both of these. If I add the blue too early, it makes quite a boring grey. So if I add it to that mix with more lilac in, then this is the right sort of balance. It's quite hard to see with the light shining off it, so I turn the palette for you to see. And I'll just keep adding blue here for the highlights. So you can see this relates really to that reference where we go from a soft kind of brown grey into lilac and finally into that blue highlight. For shadows, then I'm just going to add some of the burnt umber into the brown grey. Burnt umber's really strong, which is fantastic. It's very versatile, but you have to be careful not to obliterate and do really, really strong shadows. I found the olive brown that I used first of all to be too soft, and where I really wanted some contrast, I couldn't get it. So yeah, I prefer this one, but be careful. It's a strong paint, and we're going to use this shadow color and this snow blue quite a lot throughout this vampire. Maybe throughout the whole piece, but definitely throughout this whole vampire. I prime the model black. I'm using Colourforge primer at the moment. I find it to be really matte and smooth, so I like it a lot. I'm going to airbrush some grey, this Royal Light Grey from Tamiya, and I didn't choose this grey for any reason. I just wanted it to be Tamiya because they airbrush the best. I actually would have just primed it grey, so if you don't have an airbrush, don't worry. Just prime it with grey. The Games Workshop contrast grey is absolutely amazing. I just did it this way because obviously I have an airbrush, but I'd have no problems going from flat grey. I actually end up spraying most of the model grey. It's one of those things where you don't need an airbrush, but if you've got one, you might as well do this. It doesn't take too long at all. But the results will be the same if you're doing it from a grey primer or doing it black and grey. You can see after I've finished airbrushing that the skin is pretty much all flat grey, and I've just missed the trousers because they don't need to be anything. And that's why it doesn't matter if you airbrush or just use a can. As long as the skin is a grey, it's going to be really helpful. I start off my base coat with brown grey from Scale 75. This doesn't have amazing coverage, so the grey really helps. And I'm diluting it a fair bit, so it kind of goes in the recesses a little bit, but it also helps with just a really smooth foundation. This is a Golden Demon piece for me, so I do need to take my time and I do need to get a good result. So we're not going to paint super neat, but we want the paint to be smooth so we can correct it. That's the difference between having a good finish and being, smooth transitions. I just need the paint to be nice and smooth. You can see on the face actually it is sitting in the recesses quite nicely, and it's not like a wash, but it does kind of help to start with. This paint is a bit of a pain to use because, it's soft and the coverage isn't great, but I think it's worth it for the tone and the finish and the look it will give the skin. I build up second coats with this and I focus it more into the shadows. On the right hand side, the face, that's where I'm going to have the light. So I don't really need a strong base tone with this brown grey because I'm probably going to highlight it up a bunch too. So yeah, I just focus in all the areas where I think it's going to be a shadow and do a kind of second coat of that. You can see it's tinted the grey primer and it already looks pretty nice. And I like painting this way at the moment. So starting with quite a pale beginning and sort of, toning things down gradually. I'm getting good results painting this way. I then would add some shadows. Here I'm using the olive brown. Like I mentioned, it wasn't really strong enough. I think I was not being very brave at this point with the shadows, and later I had to darken them up a bunch. So what I would do is actually add some pretty dark shadows and use that burnt umber instead. You can see on the underside of the arm here, it's barely darker at all with the olive brown. It's kind of, just not really doing anything. So go for the burnt umber and add some dark shadows at this point. I just had to do it later. Now we're going to start to add some mid-tone highlights. And this is going to be our first mix of brown grey with the lilac added to it. And for this, try not to pick out any of the muscles too much. You want to paint the arm quite generally. Here you can see I'm picking out some of the muscles to start with, but later I kind of soften those off. You don't really want the recesses to be really deep and dark, so just paint, most of the muscles in this colour, to be honest. Really, the shadow is going to be for the underside of the arm and all those bits that are kind of covered. This arm, for sure, is going to be in the light, so I want to paint most of it in this mid-tone. This deltoid here is a really good example. You've got the 3 heads of the deltoid, and don't separate those at this point. You can see I painted just a big block at the top, and we can separate those later when we add highlights. But at the first part, don't separate the muscles too much. If we have strong separations between all of the muscles, it's too cartoony. Actually, I think it's one of our jobs as miniature painters to make things look more natural. If a sculpt has a cartoony sculpt where you can see all the defined muscles, then we shouldn't exaggerate them further with paint. You can actually soften them by painting into some of those recesses, and this will just help make you get a more natural look. And if you like the cartoony look, then you can go for it, but this is what I try and do when I paint any kind of muscular figure, actually soften up some of the sculpts. So we're back to the deltoids again. You can see I'm still ignoring those separations in the sculpt and just trying to paint light as if it's a big kind of general shape. And this has got a little bit of the snow blue in now, and I'm going to go through gradually with this. The snow blue is very light, so if I add lots in, then it's going to jump up too quickly. So I just add a small amount at a time, as you saw at the beginning, until I get enough contrast. Here you can see me focus on the head, particularly the forehead, and I want the light to be on the right hand side, so you can see my brush strokes are going across the head towards there. And I want the purple to kind of remain on the left, and then we'll push that blue as we go through the colours onto the right. So you'll be able to see that kind of change from purple into blue across the forehead. Now with more blue in the mix, and you can see I'm still not separating the heads of those shoulders. I'm just painting it like a general shape, softening it off. I will separate them by the end, but this is going to help. And you can start to see the shift from purple into blue, but I think it's nice and subtle. And I do start to pick out some details on the muscles now, like highlighting the bicep and the separate things on the forearm. It's just the very beginning that you don't want to get into detailing these things too much. Now we're really starting to push the light on the forehead here. Actually, I think this is looking really good. I think this is where it's looking the best. I made a few mistakes on the head and had to go back and forth, but this is looking really nice because we have the purple in there, we've got the blue, and it's all looking very well defined. So yeah, this is starting to really come along. At this point, stuff was getting in the way, so I actually separated the model. I didn't glue it on, I just had some putty in there. So I'm going to go and paint this in a sub-assembly now with that arm separately. And also, I was having a hard time judging if I got the contrast on the skin right. So I blocked in some of the areas like this shoulder pad, just in black because it was going to be dark for sure. And it just helps you make a judgment call on if the skin's looking good or not. I started to work on the hair because I thought if I had some other details around it, again, I could tell if I liked the skin. And with the hair, I went for similar tones so it wasn't too contrasting. But I just went for the brown grey and I added in pale blue, which is actually just a grey from Vallejo. So we're skipping out the kind of violet step and we're using a grey which has less blue in. So it's similar tones, but they're even more desaturated. And that would allow me to do quite a light coloured hair. I wanted it to be very grey, almost white, but you can see that little bit of purple is making a huge difference. Here I'm picking out all the strands, and later I'll just pick out a few strands where I want the light to be. We don't want the hair to kind of take centre stage. We really want that to be on the forehead and the eyes. So I do highlight this with a nice light source from the right, but I don't want it to be kind of shiny hair. So we want it to be pale, but not shiny and not too vibrant. I focused some highlights on the upper right, but being careful not to keep going and making that hair look shiny and too bright. So I just needed to make sure I didn't get too carried away over highlighting this part. I also painted the eyes, which I struggled with because they were very small, and I painted these black, then putting a little bit of orange in the bottom left, and then just the white dot as small as I could in the upper right. With a few details around it done and the black blocked in, I could make a better judgment call how the skin was looking. And yeah, there definitely isn't enough contrast. I've actually done the highlights a little bit too big here, which is fine. I'd rather that than too small because it's so easy to, shrink the size of these. So what I like to do is do some glazing here, and I went back to a previous mix. First of all, I did some glazes with brown grey and a little bit of the lilac in. This is very diluted, and I use a tiny bit on a small brush. Here I'm using a 2-0, and I just gradually blend it in and adjust the shape of that highlight on the deltoid. You can see I've got the shadow at the bottom there, so I'm just gradually increasing the size of that shadow, and it does help to blend everything together anyway, and you get some really nice colours, so I like painting in this way. Highlights too big, make them smaller if you need to, but you're blending and getting nice colours in at the same time. As well as glazing specific little areas you want to change, you can glaze the entire area to tint it. I find mine a little bit colourless because I didn't have enough lilac in my mix, so I did a glaze all over of brown grey, but I increased how much lilac was in. And I just made sure I didn't have much on my brush, so I could put down a nice uniform layer over the whole thing. Now I had darkened everything up a little bit and got a little bit of a stronger colour. When I reapplied the blue highlights, I had much more contrast. I had more separation between the purple and the blue. Basically, I wasn't brave enough in the initial steps, and I pushed the amount of purple in there, and then I got this nice separation. You don't want it to be really purple, really blue, so it is tricky, but you can see how you can manage this by just glazing, gradually reapplying stuff, and you don't have to get it right first time. I was really happy after this step. I just went round adjusting things. A good example here is on the back of this deltoid. Where I'd kind of glazed it, the shadow looked too big now, so I got some of that brown grey, nice and diluted, and again I just adjusted the volumes of things. If it's not looking natural, try and analyse, well, how big is the highlight? Is that why it doesn't look natural? And I'm just adjusting here, so we're going back and forth between the same colours, but just trying to get everything to feel right, balancing the size of the highlights and the colours. I really focused on the face and the arm because they're the most important parts, and they had the brightest highlights. I hadn't really started the wings, and I thought, yeah, that'll be the same colour. And I tried a slightly different way where I base coated the dark colour with a mix of burnt umber in, and then I applied the brown grey in this way. I didn't get a really drastic result, but I did find it easier to get more contrast. So yeah, there's definite merits for going from the darkest up to the lightest or starting in the middle. I would choose whichever you prefer. I essentially repeated these steps for all the other areas containing skin, and I think I did this in 3 sessions, sort of 3 evenings. So I really did take my time, and I did the back as one piece, and then I did the wings, and I needed the wings separate to get in there. So yeah, I just wanted to give you an idea of how long it took me to do this skin, but my initial evening was kind of the face and the arm to get it right, and then I had to repeat myself on the other areas, but I didn't push the contrast as much, so I repeated all these steps, but on places like the back, I wanted it a little bit darker. I still used all the colours, but I didn't push all the way to that snow blue, I just reined it back a little bit. By this time I'd got used to the recipe I'd come up with, and I was really happy with the results I was getting. One mistake I make often is I paint the most important parts first, and then I get better at using the colours, and then areas like the back look better because I've practiced it more. So don't be like me and do things that are important first. Have a little trial, and if you really want it to be great, then trial out the colours on maybe another model. It's probably what I should have done, but I was so eager to paint this vampire and get stuck in. It turned out okay in the end, but yeah, I'm just saying this is something I always do, which I don't recommend. So here we are looking at the final results of the skin. I did adjust and go back and forth quite a few times over the sort of 3 nights I spent on the skin. but everything was the steps I've basically laid out to you. I just kept spotting little mistakes and tweaking and adding, but in the end, I really like the colours. I love the subtle grey purplish colour. Frustratingly, I'm finding it doesn't photograph or video too well, but in the hand you can really separate the purple from the blue, so I hope you can pick it up on your screen. But I'm really happy because I often paint colours, I think, too bold and too saturated, which is nice, but I wanted to kind of change and be a bit more subtle. So I still feel like I'm painting like me with my colours of purple and whatever, but yeah, I was happy with this result. Looking at the reference we did at the start, it's not quite the same, it's not as dark overall, but I really like what I've done. And you can see I've been painting for the other videos to come and having the other things around it, particularly the wing membranes, because I've done those in a brown. I'm looking forward to showing you those, but that really helps make the skin color sing. And I'm very happy with how the sword turned out. So yeah, all the elements on the model are coming together. I think I'm probably about halfway through the painting. Next week, we're going to do non-metallic metal, and that's going to be silver for the blade, as well as the gold hilt. And then we'll go through the smaller details, like the wing membranes, the black armor, and so forth. But I'm really happy with getting this first video done. I'm really enjoying the model, and I think it's going to look great when it's all done. I don't have loads to do. I've kind of done the main bits, which are, of course, the skin and the sword. So yeah, I'm feeling really good at this point. I think in my head, it's actually one of my favorite models I've painted, mostly because, you know, the color choices I made and stepping away from some of the things I didn't like in my painting. So I feel like I've managed to keep the things I do like with these strong light sources, but I've started to make some better color choices. And I hope my explanation of why I wanted this color palette and then showing you why I chose the paints I did has been useful to you. It is really worth researching at the start of a project and playing in the palette and really thinking about what you want to do. You don't have to get too bogged down into color theory, but it is interesting to think about and plan these things. Getting to this point on this model has made me really excited for the piece, because it's one thing to come up with an idea. It was a big deal for me to make it, and I knew that would be the hardest bit, but I wasn't, stuck into the painting, so it still felt like, is this really going to happen? But now I've got to this point, I've got the vampire, the idea is there, I've got to do the details, but I love how he looks, and this has just given me a lot of confidence. Everything you said about the first video helped a lot, and now I've got some painting done. I'm just feeling good about the whole thing. I know there's going to be some tough parts where something goes wrong, but at the minute I'm feeling pretty positive, so I just want to get this model done in the next 2 weeks and then move on to what I think is the second hardest thing to paint, which is going to be the two vampire hunters, the father and the daughter. So I want to spend quite a long time on those two. And I think once I've got these 3 figures done, I'm going to be feeling good. The basing will be tricky, but not actually as time consuming as painting these figures. Anyway, I could ramble on about my plans, but I hope you enjoyed this first part. Hope you enjoyed the reasons why I've chosen these colours. And next time we will paint gold on the sword as well as the silver blade. So until then, see you soon.